guy like Julius Erving, who grew up mostly on Long Island, but played a lot of ball in New York,
Yeah.
to kind of, have a little fun here. You can have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Alcindor at the time, obviously. You can have all these incredible talents here. And let's not forget, even before them, Lenny Wilkins, who was a Hall of Fame basketball player, Brooklyn guy, who became a Hall of Fame coach as well.
Yeah.
But you had all these different people who were coming into the mix. You had a development of playground basketball and street ball, all coinciding with the rise of the Knicks. And I think that's when a lot of black and brown kids said, like, yo, this is a sport we can play. This is something that we can really do, and this is something that we can own without worrying about, okay, we can't find a field. You can get on the court, or you can actually just go ahead and put like a wire rim in your own house, like a lot of us did, and play ball at home. Or actually, in my elementary school, they literally painted a line on like a fence bar. And
there's so many ways. That's one of the gifts of basketball and actually soccer too. You can do it so many different ways. I mean, we ran down some grass and played on a dirt court in my neighborhood. We had a court. We had a couple of courts and parks that were the double rim chain net things and all that. But I mean, we just put a rim up anywhere we could and played. So that's the strength of what basketball does, and its accessibility, and why it's going to be a sport that always lasts and always has an impact. And I think it's always smart to tie it back to the economic situation where the game rises from.
And also keep in mind, look, New York City is, despite the gentrification that's going on, New York City is 25% black, right? Mm-hmm. Even though it's a mostly white city, it's still heavily minority in those scales, right? And so there's
more black people in New York than there are all the people in St. Louis. Like, just look at it that way. So I mean, St. Louis is not a small city. So I mean, that's still accounting for a lot of people.
We have the largest outside of like southern states per se. Like, our black population mirrors a lot of southern states. I mean, we have, like I said, 8.6 million people in the city. About 2 million are black, and most of us live in where I'm at in Harlem, or out in Brooklyn, or in the Bronx and Queens. Like, we live everywhere, but it's this something that fits us, something that we get to build, something that we get to sort of tell our own stories with. That's, the rise of basketball here in New York City it mirrors very much the rise and the growth of, rapid hip hop here in New York as well, because the situations around them, circumstances around them were very similar. Yeah. And I think that's where, I mean, also we were known for point guards as well. Even though Lou Alcindor / Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is arguably the best player to ever come out of New York, we were a point guard city. And there are some Brooklynites that want to take credit for Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was born in Brooklyn, but he only lived here for like 3 days.
Right.
he was born in a veterans hospital in Brooklyn. There's no credit there. But the thing is, like, but we claim that because it is part of the story, saying like, hey, the so-called greatest player of all time was born here. So we can at least claim that's our story. And so I think that's all these convergences, socioeconomic factors on top of just, the Knicks filled the void of the Dodgers and the Giants leaving. I think that all kind of made us what we are as a basketball city. And when basketball's on here, when the Knicks are good, like, Yankee fans, even people who were like diehard, like, Yankee fans, they cannot deny when the Knicks are a good team, there's nothing that compares in the city. Nothing.
I believe it. I mean, I've lived through Super Bowls in my town. I've lived through Stanley Cups. Mm-hmm. Nothing touches a World Series here.
Absolutely.
Nothing touches a World Series here. And even a playoff run has the level of what championship is for other sports. So that's a great way to segue into what we just finished up with, the 2020 World Series, which was a long way away from both New York and St. Louis. But, it still went down and it delivered.
It was fun.
The Los Angeles Dodgers got their first championship in 32 years. That's
crazy.
That's just crazy. Incredible. And later on, I want to talk about, what that means and just how crazy of a situation that looks like that it's 32 years since a team that's that notable won. Mm-hmm. And I think that also holds some relevance to like the Knicks and a couple of other franchises. But we'll come back around to that though.
You'll make me cry,
because the order of the day in baseball of late has been teams making good on promises deferred. Yeah. Last year we had the Washington Nationals, who had just been, just bludgeoned, despite being a very strong expansion-esque franchise, in their early years of their franchise, not even getting into the second tier. And I say expansion-esque because I look at the Nationals and the Expos as being two very different things. The way that the Expos were pared down and how they became the Nationals, it was even more egregious than the Sonics and the Thunder. But that's a conversation for
I agree with that actually.
Yeah. But with these Dodgers, I mean, it was a very fascinating run. And I'm going to say this. It was now or never, no matter how long the season went for the Dodgers.
Yes, absolutely.
They make the big trade that just, the can you believe it trade to get Mookie Betts shortly before spring training gets started back in the spring. The season goes on the shelf for 4 months. And then it's like, well, is this team going to get to actually use Mookie Betts? Like, is he ever going to play for them? And not only does he not play for them, he hits kind of the nail in the coffin home run to win that World Series for them against the Rays. So there's a couple of things I want to get into with you about that. But before we do that, obviously, before we talk about the game, I want to talk about what happened after the game. Because this season ended in as 2020 of a way as possible in every way, shape, or form.
It's the most appropriate way to end the season for baseball.
I mean, and just a stunningly, just like, okay, I guess this is where we're at type of thing. So surprisingly, a guy like Justin Turner, third baseman for the Dodgers, who's been one of the surprising heart and soul guys of the last decade or so, who, really has been there through the rise of that team and through the struggles and the downs they've had. And, was a guy that come back to New York, who got cut loose by the Mets. He just got outrighted because they said he wasn't going to be worth what the waivers conversation was going to be. And then transformed himself into just, a backbone player for that team. One of the more underrated, productive players in the National League over the last decade.
Yeah.
But they pulled him from the decisive game in the World Series in the 7th inning, I believe, which seems strange, until we found out that a COVID-19 diagnosis came back and got him in the middle of the game and caused for the Dodgers to pull him out. But then, what is it, maybe 5 minutes after they win it, he's back on the field. And I went back and forth with how I feel about this, but it was the most – I want to give you some time to kind of speak to that.
Sure.
Baseball did an amazing job. I think they reported 30-plus days of no COVID activity, nothing, after it literally almost bringing their season to a halt multiple times. For it just to to pop its head back up at the end of the road like that was just stunning. So, we talked about the viability of bubbles. We talked about what that looks like. And then in the end, baseball has a successful bubble, I guess, but we'll see.
Well,
what are your thoughts about where that ended?
Here's the thing. I think the problem is, and maybe we're mislabeling a bubble because they allowed fans to come inside. And True. I think it's hard to call it a bubble when fans, and yes, I guess they were tested and whatnot, but because we're dealing with something that, you can be asymptomatic and pass it on. You're carrying it, you can pass it on. I think it's really hard to call it successful when you're bringing in a potential of fans who can make this a super spreader event. And so that in itself is still astounds me that they decided that they need to do this. Now, the thing is, in a business sense, I understand why they were pushing for that, because, for better or for worse, baseball, while it has made a gobs amount of money out of television, it still needs the revenue. It still needs the ticket gate revenue and concessions and all this. So I understand that. And it's not like they can go back and try to ask Fox and ESPN and Turner networks, hey, can y'all give us a little more money to hold us down and all that stuff? They couldn't ask insurance companies to help them out because we've actually, and that's a whole separate conversation as well. But there were things that they couldn't all of a sudden make up their money, right? So I get it. But they created such an incredibly irresponsible environment by just introducing the idea, let alone then actually executing on the idea, letting fans come into stadiums in Texas. That it was incredibly irresponsible. There's nothing more. I think that's why for myself, this World Series was a little hard to enjoy completely. It was a fun World Series. It was It's great to actually see the two best teams in the league the whole year actually play each other in the World Series, which is something
and
that's
one
rare.
of which being a team that everybody knows, and the other one being one that a lot of people didn't know. You know,
Right.
there were a lot of people that were clamoring for the Yankees to get there, and I said, I think you want to see this Rays team. I think that if you haven't watched this year, yeah, the name brand of the Yankees makes a lot of sense. Just the same way that the Celtics playing the Lakers in the NBA Finals would have made a lot of sense in that regard. But this Rays team is the one you want to see.
Look, you want baseball, and we'll get into that a little bit, but like if you want baseball to exemplify its best, you don't want it to always be stars. You don't always want to go that way. We had that a couple years ago when it was these very Dodgers and Mookie Betts play on the other side for the Red Sox.
True.
And guess what? You had the second biggest market in the country and the 7th or 8th, depending on how it flips with San Francisco when it comes to Boston. And that was the lowest rated World Series at the time. So it's kind of, you realize like the brand doesn't always matter. I think we're starting to understand that now a little bit more than we had in the past. But here you wanted to see